Another wave of airstrikes rained down on Syria as the U.S. and its coalition target the Islamic State. A Syrian monitoring group says airstrikes by the U.S. and its Arab partners killed at least 14 militants and 5 civilians. An Islamic State command building in central Syria was hit, as well as a training camp. The raids also targeted the terror group's money-making oil refineries. CCTV's Callebs joins us with more.
Mark, exactly. U.S.-led coalition bombed Islamic State targets in Syria for the 3rd consecutive day. Here in the United States, Defense Department officials are warning American citizens this fight against the IS won't be over for a long time, and said the attacks are right now costing the U.S. somewhere between $7 and $10 million a day. The Pentagon saying it's what's necessary right now if the Islamic State is going to be stopped. The Pentagon released video for the 3rd day in a row of coalition attacks on the Islamic State in Syria. Officials say that a dozen oil refineries were hit by bombers and attack aircraft. The United States making a point of stating most of the damage was caused by coalition aircraft, not the U.S.
80% of the tonnage of the bombs dropped on those refineries, 80% of the explosive effect was caused by the coalition aircraft.
Saudi Arabia and pilots from the United Arab Emirates took part in the attack. The Islamic State has been able to capture a wide swath of land in eastern Syria and northern Iraq. The U.S. now says it has 60 member nations committed to fighting IS. While many are still hesitant to take part in attacks in Syria, the Pentagon was asked point blank if it is winning in the fight against the Islamic State.
Nobody's doing touchdown dances here. Nobody's doing high fives. We know that there's a lot of work left to do.
The U.S.-led coalition is targeting oil refineries because IS is able to generate some $2 million a day selling crude oil on the black market. But the U.S. concedes even if it was able to cut off the Islamic State funding overnight, the terrorist group would still have $1 billion in the bank. Refugees forced to flee the area wonder, why did it take the U.S. so long to strike?
The United States promised to launch airstrikes 1.5 or 2 months ago. But where are the airstrikes? Now our homeland has been destroyed. All of the women and children are fleeing.
Others say the United States is making a mistake by limiting which nations it will work with in its hand-picked coalition.
If the United States really wants to focus on counterterrorism, why don't they negotiate with Syria? Why don't they coordinate with Iran, Russia, and China? They are all important forces in exerting influence over the regional situation.
Meanwhile, U.S. officials say they believe they have identified the man responsible for the savage beheadings of 2 U.S. journalists and a British relief worker. At the same time, France is seething after the killing of a French tourist by Islamists in Algeria. Terrorists say he was killed because of the French government decision to launch airstrikes against the Islamic State. Now, if the action was meant to intimidate France, it didn't work. Thursday, French fighter pilots launched airstrikes against the IS in Iraq. Mike?
Sean, how is the U.S. military reacting to these allegations that civilians may have been killed during the most recent airstrikes in Syria?
Yeah, it's always one of those clearly very sensitive issues. The United States says that they believe that all the targets that they went after the last 3 days have been hit, pointing out they're using laser-guided missiles, and that 80% of those attacks were carried out by other members of the coalition. But the U.S. says it goes out of its way to avoid what they call collateral damage, that they try to avoid any kind of civilian injuries, death. But it is something the United States has to investigate because it's clearly something the Islamic State could use to try and prop up their effort in the area, saying the United States is the one actually hurting the civilians while the Islamic State is trying to create its own state.